Good afternoon, children.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
We were discussing about the regulation of kidney functions, and we had completed the regulation brought about by juxtaglomerular apparatus. Can anybody summarize how JGA is bringing about the regulation of kidney functions? Naureen, just begin.
JGA is a special sensitive region formed by the cellular modifications in the DCT and the afferent arteriole at the location of their contact.
What do they produce?
They produce renin, the
Renin.
hormone.
Just a minute. Okay, continue. Nandana?
A fall in glomerular blood flow or blood pressure or the GFR will cause the juxtaglomerular cells to release renin, which converts angiotensinogen 2 and angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2.
Okay, then Michael can continue. Up to the formation of angiotensin 2, she said. Now, what is the role of angiotensin 2? Michael?
I forgot.
When did you remember it?
The previous points I remember, but
Anna?
Angiotensin 2 activates adrenal cortex and to release aldosterone.
Then?
It also increases the blood pressure and
Which one? It also means?
Angiotensin 2.
Angiotensin 2 will increase
glomerular blood pressure and thereby GFR.
GFR will be increased. Then it will also stimulate the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. And what is the role of aldosterone? It will promote Malavika?
Reabsorption of Na+ and water from the distal parts of the tubule.
That also will help in increasing
increase in blood pressure
and thereby GFR. Now we'll see how the regulation of kidney functions are brought about by ANF, atrial natriuretic factor. Regulation by ANF, atrial natriuretic factor. They keep a check on the renin angiotensin mechanism. You already learned for 3 marks and all. It can be asked, briefly explain the renin angiotensin mechanism. That is what we learned just now before by the regulation of kidney function by the action of JGA. So their renin angiotensin mechanism is explained, and ANF keeps a check on the renin angiotensin mechanism. When there is an increase in the blood flow, as a result of renin angiotensin mechanism, blood pressure is increasing, blood flow is increasing, and GFR is also increased. So when there is an increase in the blood flow to the atria of heart, atrial natriuretic factor will be released. This brings about vasodilation. Angiotensin was a vasoconstrictor, but this brings about vasodilation, or it will help in dilating the blood vessel. When the blood vessels are constricted, the blood pressure increases. When they dilate, blood pressure decreases. So when by renin angiotensin mechanism, the blood pressure is increasing, it will stimulate the release of atrial natriuretic factor. And once this factor is released, they'll bring about vasodilation or dilation of blood vessels. And when the blood vessels are dilated, blood pressure will get reduced. Okay, so with that we have completed ANF, or the regulation of kidney functions by ANF. So once again, I will repeat, the role of ANF is to keep a check on renin-angiotensin mechanism as a result of the release of renin from angiotensinogen, angiotensin 1, and from that angiotensin 2 will be produced, which will help in increasing the blood pressure and also the GFR, and it will also release aldosterone. It will stimulate the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone, which will also promote the increase in GFR. So when the blood pressure increases by this method, the blood flow, when it is increasing to the atrial chamber of the heart, it will stimulate the release of ANF, and when ANF is released, it will help in reducing the blood pressure back to the normal, because it will bring about vasodilation. Angiotensin was a vasoconstrictor. This is a vasodilator, and which will help in bringing down the blood pressure. That is why we say it will keep a check on the renin-angiotensin mechanism. Renin-angiotensin mechanism, through that blood pressure increases, GFR increases, but that blood pressure can be brought down to normal with the help of ANF. Next is about micturition. Micturition means release of urine. The release of urine is known as micturition. So how micturition or urine release is taking place? When the urinary bladder gets filled up. So you know that once the blood is being filtered by the nephrons in the kidney, urine formation takes place. They will be passed on to the ureter. They'll get collected in the urinary bladder. And urinary bladder is a muscular organ. It's capable of stretching. And when the urinary bladder gets filled, it will stretch. The muscles will stretch. So in response to the stretch, there are some stretch receptors in the walls of urinary bladder. So when the muscles of this urinary bladder stretches, it will stimulate the stretch receptors present on its walls, and these receptors will send message or impulses to a central nervous system. So central nervous system analyzes the situation and sends the command via motor messages. Motor neurons, you know, motor neurons are the neurons which carry messages from the central nervous system to the muscles, and such messages which are transmitted along or across the motor neurons are motor messages. So brain or the spinal cord or the central nervous system gives the command to micturate, to carry out micturition. So that for that the smooth muscles present in the bladder will contract, and this will bring about relaxation of urethral sphincter. It's a ring-like muscle which guards the opening of urethra. So when the smooth muscles are contracted, the urethral sphincter will get relaxed and urine will be released. So you can hold on this micturition to certain extent, but when the bladder is full, you get signals, or your brain gets signals, and you get the command to release the urine and empty the bladder. So once again, the different steps involved in micturition includes are gradual. When the urinary bladder gets filled up with urine, the walls of the urinary bladder is a muscular organ, it will stretch, and upon stretching, the receptors which Okay, so that was about micturition. As I told you, when the urinary bladder gets filled with urine, the walls of the urinary bladder will stretch, which will stimulate the stretch receptors. From these receptors, messages or impulses will reach the central nervous system, and central nervous system sends the command via motor neurons, or the motor messages reach these muscles, and then these muscles in response to that will contract. This will make the sphincter, urethral sphincter, to relax, and thereby the urine will be released. Sphincter is a ring-shaped muscle present in different parts. You might have heard about anal sphincter, urethral sphincter. It's a ring-shaped muscle that controls here it controls the opening of urethra. The neural mechanism causing micturition is known as micturition reflex. So it is in response to the micturition reflex that the release of urine will take place. So on an average, an adult human being excretes 1 to 1.5 liters. Some books you can see even 1.8 liters. So approximately 2 or between 1 to 1.5 liters of urine, which contains 25 to 30 grams of urea per day. Every day, 1.5 liters of urine with 25 to 30 grams of urea is being excreted. And urine is a light yellow colored watery fluid, and it is slightly acidic. That is, the pH is 6. And the color of the urine also can change depending upon some diseased condition, because for several diseases, you analyze or clinical testing of urine samples is carried out, so that it will help us to analyze the situation or some defect or some disorders or some symptoms of the disease in the person. And not only some defect in the body or some disease in the body, apart from that, taking antibiotics, not drinking sufficient amount of water, all that can bring about change in the color of the urine. If you don't drink sufficient amount of water, the urine can turn, actually it is light yellow, it can become dark yellow or closer to orange color depending upon the amount of water you drink. And as a result of the food items, like for example, not only food items, some antibiotics, if you are under medication also, the color of the urine can change. And urine has got a characteristic smell or odor. Various conditions can affect the characteristics of urine. Urine analysis will help in clinically diagnosing some metabolic disorders. If the different metabolic activities in your body are not taking place properly, or if the kidney is not working properly, all these can be found out with the help of urine analysis. For example, presence of glucose or ketone bodies in urine is an indication of the disease diabetes mellitus. Even urine sample is tested to check whether a lady is pregnant or not. So urine sample or testing urine has so much of significance. It will help in analyzing the situation of the person, whether all the metabolic activities are taking place properly, whether some substances which are normally found in the urine is found, that is an indication of some disorder, as in the case of diabetes mellitus, presence of glucose and ketone bodies. Then, so far we were discussing about the role of kidney in the process of excretion. So in the excretion process, many other organs also contribute. They also help in the excretion process. So let's see the role of lungs, liver, and skin in excretion. Lungs, you know, it will be removing excess carbon dioxide from a body. Almost 18 liters of carbon dioxide is being removed from a body per day. And along with the exhaled air, water vapor is also released out. So they'll help in removing carbon dioxide and water. Then coming to liver. Liver secretes bile, and bile is stored in the gallbladder. All that you've learned, at the significance of bile in digestion also you have learned in class 10. It secretes bile, biliverdin, those are some pigments. Bilirubin, biliverdin, cholesterol, then degraded steroid hormones, vitamins, drugs, etc. are present this bile. Familiar with bile. So these liver will be secreting bile, steroid hormones, vitamins, and drugs. And then, along with the digestive waste, this will be removed out from the body. And bile, you know, it will be secreted into the beginning part, duodenum, or upper part of the small intestine, and it plays a very important role in digestion. Bile is not having any enzymes, but it plays a major role. It helps in digestion. It brings, do you remember, children, what are the roles of bile? Two important functions of bile you have learned in class 10. Who can tell me the points? Donna?
Yes, ma'am.
Donna, tell me the functions of bile in digestion. You know? You know the answer?
It's a
Very
fluid
important concept.
that is stored in the, that is in the, it breaks down fats.
It helps in the emulsification of fats. Large fat globules will be broken down into smaller globules by the bile juice. And at the same time, bile will provide an alkaline medium. The food which is coming from the stomach. So in the stomach, you know, acid is there. So food will be remaining in acidic medium in the stomach. So from the stomach, when this acidic food reaches the small intestine, it should be made alkaline. Only then the enzymes, pancreatic enzymes, can act on it. So this acidic food is converted into alkaline food by the presence of or with the help of bile. So those are the two functions of bile which you have learned in class 10. So here the bile also is a source of excretion. Liver secretes bile, and along with the bile, some of the unwanted substances are being removed from our body. So most of them pass out. All these, majority of these substances will be passed out along with the digestive waste. Then skin, you know, scattered on the surface of the skin, sweat and sebaceous glands are present. And when you sweat along with water, sodium chloride, sweat is salty, we say, no, sweat is salt in taste because of the presence of sodium chloride. Some amount of urea, lactic acid, etc. are getting removed through skin. And when you sweat, you feel cool. It gives a cooling effect. It's body's own mechanism. Usually you sweat when the temperature outside is very high. And sweat is a mechanism. It's your own body's mechanism to get adjusted to the high temperature. So upon sweating, your body will feel cool. So sweating gives a cooling effect on the body surface. And sebaceous glands will eliminate sterols. Cholesterol is an example for sterol. Sterols, hydrocarbons, waxes, etc. through sebum. Sebaceous glands secrete sebum. So in this sebum, the sterols, hydrocarbons, waxes, etc. are present, and that is also a method of excretion. And apart from that, sebum provides a protective oily covering for the skin. That is why your skin has got that shine on the face. And if your skin is very dry, if these sebaceous glands are not present, your skin will be very dry and wrinkles will appear very soon. But because of this oil secreted by the sebaceous glands present on your skin, you have that shine on the skin because of the oil secreted. So too much oil, if it is getting secreted, you know, our skin type are of different types. Like some have oily skin, some have dry skin, and some are having combination skin. So certain parts, those who are having combination skin, certain areas will be very oily, remaining parts will be normal, or even normal skin we say. And if oily skin means the chances of formation of pimples and acne will be more because of the excess secretion of the sebum. The sebum can even block your skin pores, and along with the dust and dirt you are exposed to, it can cause pimples or acne. But whatever it is, and that pimples and acne are common only during the teenage time. So their activity of both these glands will be more. Once you complete the teenagers, once you reach the adulthood, that pimples and acne, those are very rare. But there are people who even develop pimples and acne towards their adult ages. So there can be different reasons for that. But normally, pimples usually appear during the adolescent age because of the increased activity of sweat and sebaceous glands. So what we were saying about is the role of skin as an excretory organ. The skin is provided with sweat and sebaceous glands. By sweat, water, sodium chloride, urea, lactic acid, etc. are being removed. Similarly, sebaceous glands will secrete sebum, and through this sebum, sterols, hydrocarbons, waxes, etc. are eliminated. And both these secretions have an advantage. Sweat is being produced, and this sweat will give you a cooling effect to get adjusted to the high temperature. Similarly, sebum released will give a protective oil covering for our skin. Okay. Saliva is also having a role. Its role in digestion, but apart from that, the saliva also helps in excreting small amounts of nitrogenous waste. Now we are moving on to the next topic, some disorders. Any doubts in what we discussed? Role of skin, liver, and saliva in excretion. Anything to be repeated, children?
Ma'am, can you repeat the liver?
Are you there?
part?
Liver. Okay,
Yes,
I'll
ma'am.
repeat. So we started with the lungs. Lungs will help in removing carbon dioxide as well as water. The liver helps in the secretion of liver secretes bile, and through the bile, bilirubin, biliverdin, cholesterol, steroid hormones, vitamins, drugs, etc. are excreted because these are present in the bile, and bile is used up in the process of digestion. So along with the digestive waste, so bile is being released into the upper part of the small intestine known as duodenum for facilitating digestion. So along with the digestive waste, the different substances present in bile can also be removed from the body. Okay, Nandana?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then after that, we discussed about skin, and through the sweat and sebaceous glands, also waste are being removed. Water, sodium chloride, urea, lactic acid, etc. are removed by sweat, and sweat also helps in giving you a cooling effect, helps in regulating your body temperature. Then sebaceous glands will secrete sebum, which contains sterols, hydrocarbons, waxes, etc. So it's a source of excretion or a method of excretion. And at the same time, the presence or the release of sebum will give a shine on your body. A protective oil covering is given to your body. So this presence of oil will delay aging also. If people, those who are having very, very dry skin, they develop wrinkles much earlier and looks aged. Okay. But those who are having oily skin, because of the oil present, wrinkles will appear later and they can delay their aging. Saliva eliminates small amounts of nitrogenous waste. So saliva is also a method of excretion, and we can excrete a small amounts of nitrogenous waste are excreted via saliva. Now we are moving on to the different disorders of our excretory system. Starting with the first one, uremia. We are not dealing with all the disorders, but a few disorders of the excretory system are dealt with. Accumulation of urea in blood, which may lead to kidney failure. Actually, urea is a nitrogenous waste which need to be removed from our body. But by some reason, this urea can get accumulated. So if that happens, this can gradually lead to failure of kidney. That is known as uremia. Then moving on to the next one, very common disease, renal calculi. Renal calculi is commonly known as kidney stones. Stones or insoluble mass of crystallized salts. So salts can get crystallized and form insoluble mass. They will appear as stone. Sometimes these stones formed can have sharp edges and they can be very painful. It can even result in bleeding when these sharp edges poke inside. And actually these are oxalates. So different food items are having oxalates, and intake of too much of oxalates or food items containing these oxalate can be one reason. And some of the food items which can cause kidney stones are nuts, tea, cabbage, spinach, tomato, chocolates. All these can, some of the food items which contain oxalates, and intake of these food items rich in oxalates can lead to the formation of such crystallized mass of salts which are insoluble. They will not get dissolved and they can block the, so it can change its position. It can come down to the urinary bladder. It can even come down to the ureter, making it very painful while carrying out micturition or while passing urine. And if the edges are sharp, it can damage the tissues around and can cause even bleeding. And next one is glomerulonephritis. So this is a condition where the glomerulus, you already know what is glomerulus, the network of capillaries present inside the Bowman's capsule of renal tubule. So when that gets swollen, when that carries out inflammation, or inflammation takes place in the glomeruli, it can lead to glomerulonephritis. These are some of the disorders of our excretory system: uremia, renal calculi, and glomerulonephritis. Now let's move on to the disorders of, already we were discussing about the disorders of the excretory system. One solution for some of the excretory disorders can be solved by hemodialysis. Dialysis, I think you're familiar with. So that is also dealt with under the disorders, because some of the disorders of excretory system needs dialysis. Dialysis means, you know that kidney is carrying out the filtration of blood. But when your kidneys are not functioning properly, the filtration of blood, that is very, very important. We cannot allow the nitrogenous waste to get accumulated in the blood. If your body cannot carry out the function, this should be carried out outside your body by an artificial kidney. When I say artificial kidney, it is not having the appearance of a kidney, but it's a unit, it's a device which will help in purifying the blood of the patient outside the body. Because normally in a healthy human being, the filtration or the purification of blood takes place within the body by the kidneys. But if both the kidneys fail to function, then the same process should be carried out outside the body. In patients with uremia, accumulation of urine, the nitrogenous waste, instead of being removed, it's getting accumulated in the body. What makes it accumulate? It is being removed by the kidney by filtering blood. So if your kidney is not functioning properly, urea can get accumulated and cause the situation uremia. Then we have to carry out hemodialysis. We call it as an artificial kidney, and it consists of a dialyzing unit, as you can see in the picture. And in the dialyzing unit, there'll be cellophane tubes, some coiled tubes made of a substance known as cellophane. So cellophane tube, a coiled cellophane tubes will be kept in a dialyzing fluid. So the hemodialysis or the dialyzing unit consists of a coiled tube which is made of cellophane, and this will be dipped or immersed in a dialyzing fluid. And the dialyzing fluid will be having same composition as that of a blood plasma. But the only difference is that since the patient's kidneys are not functioning, their blood will be having nitrogenous waste, whereas these nitrogenous waste will be absent in the dialyzing fluid. Blood will be drained from a convenient artery, from one of the arteries of the patient. Blood will be pumped into this dialyzing unit. So there it will be flowing through the cellophane tubes immersed in dialyzing fluid. So what happens? The concentration of urea is almost nil in dialyzing fluid, whereas it is in high concentration in the blood. So it will move from a region of high concentration, that is from your blood, to a region of low concentration, that is the dialyzing fluid. So from the artery of the patient with kidney failure will be pumped, the blood will be pumped to the dialyzing unit. So in the dialyzing unit, the blood of the person will be passing through the cellophane tubes dipped in dialyzing fluid. Because of the difference in the concentration of this urea, from his blood, urea will be transferred, or the nitrogenous waste will be transferred into the dialyzing fluid, and the blood will get purified. And the dialyzing fluid, once it is getting loaded with this nitrogenous waste, it will be continuously replaced. Used up solution will be removed and fresh solution will be supplied at regular intervals. So seeing the situation, more and more dialyzing fluid, fresh dialyzing fluid will be replaced. And one thing to be noted is that, your blood, once it is exposed to the external conditions, it can get clotted. The blood can get clotted. Okay, so once the blood gets clotted, it cannot be taken back to the body of the patient. So what is done is, once the blood from the artery is pumped into the dialyzing unit, an anticoagulant will be added prior to taking it to the dialyzing fluid. Anticoagulant, example for an anticoagulant is heparin. And this anticoagulant, as the name suggests, it prevents clotting. Clotting will not take place. And then after adding the anticoagulant, the blood will be taken to the dialyzing fluid. So until the process is completed, the blood will be having the anticoagulant, so that the blood will not get clotted when it is exposed to external surroundings. But once the process is completed, again, it will be okay. The porous cellophane, I'll come back to that point. The porous cellophane membrane of the tube allows the passage of molecules based on the concentration gradient. I already told you, because in the dialyzing fluid, urea will be absent, and in the blood it is more. So from the blood it will be passed on to the dialyzing fluid. That is what is meant as based on the concentration gradient. As nitrogenous wastes are absent in the dialyzing fluid, they'll move out from the blood and clarifying the blood. The cleared blood will be pumped back to the body through the vein. It will be taken from the artery, and once it is purified, it will be pumped back into the body after adding antiheparin. Antiheparin. In the beginning, we added heparin, an anticoagulant. So towards the end, before taking it back to the body, we are adding antiheparin, which will remove the effect of heparin. Because when the blood is inside the person's body, we should not make it anticoagulant, because in that case, if he meets with an accident, or if by some reason there is a wound or a cut, his blood will not clot. So when it is given back to his body, there should not be any anticoagulant. The blood should be able to clot as and when it is required. That is why we are adding antiheparin to remove the effect of that heparin, and so that the blood can clot depending upon the requirement of the body. Hope you have understood what I meant. Yes? Have you? Why
Yes,
we are
ma'am.
adding coagulant and anticoagulant? Before taking to the what consists, or the dialyzing unit comprises of cellophane tubes. Highly coiled cellophane tubes will be present. See the figure. So some cellophane tubes are present, and they are immersed in dialyzing fluid, and blood from the person's body, blood from the artery of the person will be allowed, will be pumped, and it will be allowed to pass through the these cellophane tubes, and as it passes through the cellophane tubes, urea content or the nitrogenous waste will be more here. Here it will be absent. So it will move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So blood will be free of urea, and the purified blood, which is not containing any nitrogenous waste, will be taken back to your body, and used dialysing fluid will be taken away at regular intervals, and fresh fluid will be supplied. Okay, and before pumping the blood into the dialysing unit, we will add heparin, so that the blood will not clot when the process is going on. But when the process is completed, we add anti-heparin, so that the blood can clot when it is required, and it will be taken back to the person's body. Okay. Next is kidney transplantation. In case of acute renal failure. So sometimes dialyzing can be a solution, but depending upon the situation, sometimes repeated dialyzing, maybe at frequent intervals, it has to be carried out. Then it becomes very troublesome. The permanent solution for that is a transplantation, and it is the ultimate method in correcting acute renal failures. We need to get a kidney from a donor. It's better to receive kidney from a close relative. Blood groups should be matching, then it's always desirable to get it from a close relative. The more closest the relative is, the lesser will be the chances for a body to reject it. Your body can recognize anything which is external, anything which is not yours. That is why if some organ transplantation is carried out, the body has a tendency to reject. And actually, when some organ transplantation is carried out, even if it is a close relative, lifelong, you will have to take some immunosuppressant drugs. Otherwise, what will happen is your body can always recognize something foreign. So they have a tendency to reject it. But still, it's always desirable to take or to accept it from a close relative. So if it is from a close relative, the chances for rejection will be less. But still, you will have to take some immunosuppressant drugs throughout your life under the direction of a doctor, so that your body will not reject it. And it's not that easy to get a kidney as per our needs or as per our requirements. And till an organ transplant, till a donor is ready, or till we get a proper donor, dialyzing can be carried out in order to sustain the life of the person. Okay. Any doubts?
No.
I was not going fast, no?
No, ma'am.
You were able to follow. Okay. If any doubts are there, you please clarify next period. Just read it, and any doubts, please let me know. Thank you, children.